Have you been wondering how to build a successful strategy with open source for your company? Or why would you invest in open source projects when you can use the code for free? Are you an open source maintainer on the edge of burnout? Or a newcomer who's too intimidated to take the first steps and get involved? Maybe you're not a code developer and you think that there's no place for you in the open source ecosystem. You're not alone. My name is Ildiko Vancha, and this is the My Open Source Experience podcast, where my guests and I share our open source journeys with all the successes, the struggles, and joyful moments. Find the answers to your questions and dilemmas, and more importantly, join us and be part of the community. Hello, everyone, and welcome back on the My Open Source Experience podcast. I have Mike Gifford with me today, and we will talk about a topic area that we haven't really touched on much on this podcast, if at all, which is accessibility. We talked about inclusivity, but when it comes to accessibility in the context of the web, that is not something that we touched on. And it's also not something that, for example, I talk much about with anyone because of being so fortunate that I don't have disabilities that would prevent me from seeing or listening to content that I'm interested on the web. But not everyone is that fortunate, so we will talk about what is accessibility exactly in the web space and what you can do to improve it. But before we do all that, Mike, can you please introduce yourself to the audience, tell a little bit about your background, and what do you do today?
I work at Civic Actions, and I'm a open standards and practices lead there. I'm also a WC3 invited expert. I sit on the Web Sustainability Interest Group committee and I'm also involved with the Accessible Roles and Responsibilities community group, and help out where I can in other areas with the WC3. Also a Drupal core accessibility maintainer. So Drupal is, as you probably know, a large open source content management system. And it's one that I've been engaged with on accessibility since 2009. So it's been a really interesting process to sort of watch the community grow and see how things evolve on that front. I also ran a business in Ottawa for 21 years. I working with government and nonprofit sector, and it was a really interesting experience having tried to go off and shift things in Canada, but now I'm working for an American company and trying to shift things both in the United States but also globally, trying to find ways to take the best practices around the world on open source and accessibility and sustainability, and trying to find ways to blend those into practices that we can more quickly adopt.
Do you remember when you first learned about free and open source software?
I definitely do. It was actually back in the probably 91 maybe. It was a long time ago, because I have some good friends who are who've been involved in open source and promoting open source for a long time. And in fact, if it weren't for the support of friends of mine in the open source community, who got me involved in learning web development and learning PHP and databases and for that matter server-side administration, like I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't have the friends in the community who were able to support me in my learning journey and be able to piece together the technical elements, but also to ground me in the philosophical elements, to be able to have a sense of like, well, why is it that the GPL and the MIT might be preferable in one case or another, or to have those conversations around the context with which these open source licenses help to go off and potentially shape a community, or potentially guide how the protections for those people who are involved in creating the content and the material there.
Were you immediately aware of the community and the people in open source? Or, well, in 91, that was still free software, because I think open source, the term was coined in 98.
Yeah.
Were you aware of the people and the community right away, or did you get in touch with the freely available tools and learning that you can access the source code as well, and learning about the community might have come later?
In some ways, like I met the community first because they were, friends from physics class or people I socialized with when in what I was involved in. So there were already people in the community. It took me actually a while to go off and to get into the coding side, and then to weave into like how do I actually find open source projects to use and to make a business out of it and be able to and then to start to think about contributing. Like, how do I take on the ownership of a project? I became the maintainer of an open source project back in 2000 or 2001. It was an old, wasn't old at the time, but just the maintainer walked away from it and was like, oh, this is a bit of code that I plan to use, and so I ended up taking responsibility for it. And there's nothing quite like having the responsibility for a project when you're just learning software. So trying to build a community around that piece of software, and I worked with that for about 3 years before I moved over to the Drupal community.
Were you able to get involved and participate in any of the communities that you learned about, or collaborate with your friends in these environments before you touched code, so as a non-code contributor?
There wasn't really, back at that time, there weren't that many ways that could be done. It wasn't, and I didn't have design skills. I had enthusiasm, but I don't think in terms of discussions and the ideas and the philosophical underpinnings of it were definitely appealing. But I didn't have an easy way to access this. I mean, there's people who complain about, how horrible GitHub is, and I quite like GitHub, and it's so much better than what SourceForge was. And I'm not even sure, like when I started, like I don't know when SourceForge started, but it was definitely new and better at the time than what people were using before, using CVS or just sharing files back and forth, and like there wasn't a way to go off and just have access. SourceForge was the first space to go off and to share code in a version controlled sort of fashion that I was aware of, and that was really important to be able to be able to build a community around the piece of software. But it didn't have all the other pieces that you now have with GitHub or GitLab or any of the other modern repos that are hosting most of our code, and that those additional pieces are really quite important, like having that space to have a discussion and a dialogue and to deal with comments about what are the issues you want to address and how you want to prioritize them. Like that didn't exist.
So it sounds like that having access to the tools where you can interact with people about the code and the project, that is also very helpful in building the community around.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was both in terms of extending the functionality of the code base, as well as being able to sort of learn what people need. What do they want? Like how do you engage with people, and how do you find the code that you might want to implement or to engage with? This is all. It didn't all start back there, but Google wasn't around when I was starting my business. Like it was there's a lot with Ask Jeeves and other tools. Just because I'm an old guy, these are things that I've seen the progression and degradation of these tools.
And now in the AI age, we will just experience that all over again, I guess, in a much higher speed.
Exactly.
In terms of your first maintainer experience, you mentioned that you took over a project where the previous maintainer walked away. How hard was it to try and build a community around that project as much as you tried?
It was really difficult, and partly was my approach was to take another community's code and trying to bring it in, and that did actually help because Well, yeah, you probably know of Slashdot, which was at the time a popular Perl-based forum, and there was a number of clones of Slashdot that came out, and some of them are still around. But one of the earliest ones was called PHP Slash, and I was able to modify PHP Slash in order to be able to create more functionality, and then was able to bring that into the tool that I was using by heavily hacking the code base, and that was really quite interesting in terms of doing that. But mostly it was like borrowing from other communities and trying to find ways of hiring people who had the skills I needed internationally as contractors to be able to work on the code base, and I'm definitely in touch with some of those people that I initially brought on board, and it's been quite fascinating to sort of see how these some of these communities of open source developers have lasted for decades, and it's nice to have that type of friendship built around the engagement with working together through software, through multiple companies and multiple iterations and multiple, like, there's people who can work together collaboratively and who know how to do that and enjoy that, and it's nice to see when we're able to stay together and still continue to have some engagement over time.
I share a little bit of that experience with being involved in the OpenStack community, and OpenStack has celebrated its 15th anniversary already, so
That's great.
It's over a decade now. It's a decade and a half, and it really is something kind of magical to it, that you can work and collaborate with people from all around the globe and just keep going, and you have new faces showing up, and sometimes you see the old faces showing up in a different community, and your network is growing, and all the knowledge sharing and how much people help each other, like whether they are in the communities from personal experience or motivated by the company they are working for. When it comes to working on a common shared goal that the community has, that usually brings out this helping each other out mentality of people, and it's a very nice and inspiring environment, and I always learn a lot no matter which community I participate in, stumble on, listening in on some meetings or join a chat platform. There's so much you can learn from the other people. It's just amazing.
And there's so many amazingly bright people who I've been able to learn from, and who like knowing that these are people that are really leaders in the world in terms of how to build software, how to organize communities. Like there's it's been a really benefited a great deal from learning from people who have freely given their resources and their time and their inspirations to make these tools better. But it's interesting. Like I moved from the content management system that I was maintaining over to Drupal right around Drupal 4.5, which is 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. And I did that partly because there was, I believe that Drupal was a better software that I had developed, that I was running into problems with the code that I'd been building on, because I'd been building it for individual clients, and I didn't have an architecture that could scale all that well, and so I was running into all kinds of issues with that. But I really I was able to go and to move over to Drupal, but partly was the idea that I'd built a multilingual content management system very early on, and I was able to do English, Farsi, Arabic, Hebrew, and build sites around bidirectional websites, multilingual bidirectional websites, which is really quite a niche area. And I understood that Drupal was going to be able to implement that and roll that out. And it was was years until that happened, but it was there's definitely hopes and aspirations of that happening, but it didn't actually happen for several years. So it was definitely a bumpy migration, trying to go off and to bring our clients over from a system that did work and meet their needs to one that was like, well, it kind of works if you go like this, and here's some modules that will probably work for now, but there might be another one coming along later that will be better, and so. Yeah, the challenges of an evolving code base.
You had a system, a framework that you built, and then you decided to look for something that has a bit more broader functionality, and that's how you switched over to Drupal from that framework?
It was partly because I was running into technical limitations within the code base I developed, but also that I had... It's one thing being a big fish in a very, very, very small pond, and it's another thing to go off and be able to draw on a global community of people that is advancing at a pace that there's so many people involved in engaging with Drupal. There's a phrase, there's a module for that, because there's always somebody who has thought of an idea or developed something that is at least pretty close to what you're thinking, and that not always, but there's often a case where somebody has started down a path and built a tool and released it and shared it back to the community that is. That's something that you can at least start from, and that will get you 80% of the way there. And that's just not something that's going to be possible if you're building your own project. You have to pay for all of the R&D. You have to do all of the testing and security work yourself. And in the Drupal world, there's frameworks around this. There's people who know more about security than I will ever know, and people who are able to evaluate and test and just the resources that a large community offers to provide resilience and scale is totally important.
The framework that you worked on, I assume that was proprietary code that you developed in your business.
No, it was open source to begin with. I took one open source project and I maintained it as an open source project. Yeah, so it's being... Yeah, the code is probably still up on SourceForge, but it's I don't think it works anymore. So,
I mean, we all know if you ever put anything on the internet, you will never be able to fully remove it.
Yeah.
In terms of engaging with a community and diversity, how was your experience when you started to engage with the Drupal community? Because it sounds like that you weren't a silent user for too long.
No, I wasn't silent for too long. A couple of years. I mean, it was definitely... you can see all the comments and whatnot on Drupal.org, because that's again, it's all kept in perpetuity. So there's lots of if people are curious, you can find that out. But I definitely became more active, essentially when I realized that there was an opportunity for Drupal to become more accessible, and that would help me and my business be able to sell to the government of Canada. And so I went up to Angie Byron, who was she's known as Web Chick. She's in our community quite famous, but also in terms of women in tech. She's played a really influential role in trying to shape how things are organized. But Angie was I went up to her and said, hey, there's a bug here, and we should fix that. And she said, yes, you should. Go file an issue, make it happen. And it's like, oh, right. And I did. But then it started to become like addictive, because I started to find other bugs and then learn more about the process. And I didn't come with I had a much like my journey with open source, my accessibility journey, I'd already had a grounding in the philosophy, because I had friends who had disability who had schooled me in disability rights. So I understood why it was important. That wasn't the mystery. It was like, well, how do I make this applicable to me, and how do I find the time and the space to be able to make this a priority for me to implement when I'm trying to set up a small business and be able to onboard clients and all of that stuff. So, but it was quite interesting to be able to make that jump and be able to then start learning about how I can how I can start influencing a large open source project that has millions of websites around the world that use it, and billions of sites that are pages that are loaded every day running Drupal. So if not trillions of pages.
Were the bugs and those issues that you found from the get-go around accessibility issues?
The ones that I was talking with were accessibility issues. There were other things that I had wanted to fix around internationalization earlier on, but that was something that I more sort of tossed some ideas and some issues into the issue queue and didn't follow up with it. But when I started to take on the responsibility of trying to fix this issue, that's when it got real. And I was like, okay, well, what is the process of actually changing somebody else's code? I know what it's like on my own code. If I'm the maintainer, I know how I can fix that. But if I have to sort of deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who are engaging with this community, how do I influence that so that the things I care about are the things that are brought into the core of the project?
Since we started to talk about accessibility, can you define what accessibility is in the web context and the web development context?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially the ability for somebody not to face barriers if they have vision issues, mobility issues, cognitive issues, like sensory issues. There's a lot of things that we don't even think about as people who don't identify as having a disability. But it's those barriers, and frankly, there's a lot of us who have disabilities that don't necessarily think about them. Like, I take off my glasses and it's harder to read the text. I'm sure it's the same with you as well. That's a kind of disability. If I break my glasses, then what happens? I have allergies, and so there's the idea of permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. Like, I have allergies, so when the pollen's out, my eyes are watery. Like, it's harder for me to see the screen. Again, that's a situational disability that affects all sorts of people. That's a temporary disability based on just what's in the air around us that we have no control over. Situational disabilities are also incredibly common. How many of us go outside and try and access an address or read some information on our phone on a day where there's just a lot of whether it's a cloudy day or a sunny day, you're trying to read the phone, but there's not enough contrast on the phone for you to go off and to see it. It's like, well, that's just people building for a situation that's not the real world. Like, nobody is going to go off and only access a website in 2026 only on their device in a light controlled environment. Like, people are using it all over the places, whether it's in a coffee shop or whether it's in a so it's trying to just build for real life and for real people. Even like just looking at the two of us, like, either of us could have a more serious disability tomorrow. Like, our vision, we have it today, it might go away tomorrow. We can't know that we all take for granted that we'll be able to have the same abilities one day to the next, because generally that's the case. But that's not the human experience. The human experience is that as we grow older, our abilities degrade over time, and we don't want to admit that because I think we're afraid of mortality. But like, it's a real concern when you're trying to when you have a society that's built around denying the fact that we have disabilities as humanity, that it's inherently human to have disabilities. We there's all kinds of models around how do you just define and describe disability, and the most common one that people think about is the medical model. Like, does the doctor say you're blind? Does do you have a medical condition that would stop you from doing this? Like, that's sort of one model. The other model is the social model. Is like, why do we not think about the fact that people are trying to we've inserted these barriers by just only building for one particular use type, and so it's that we've created these barriers in our society.
It's very interesting, like the way how you describe it. Like, for example, I think I messed up some configuration on my phone or something because it stopped adjusting the contrast that you were talking about. So I have to do it manually very often. The funny thing is that I am annoyed, obviously, but I didn't really think about this as an accessibility issue. I was just thinking that this is really annoying. I used to be able to see decently enough without the glasses. However, because I've been wearing glasses since I was 2 years old, the muscles in my eyes are a little bit kind of overused in a way. But then I work in the IT industry. I stare at the laptop 10 to 12 hours a day. I also chose to run a podcast. It's a lot of really focused staring, which is really terrible for your eyes. But then it doesn't even occur to me as a context that it is an accessibility issue for me. I'm just trying to figure out how I could reduce staring at the screen. So it is really hitting close to home. However, thinking about all this in the context of accessibility and what the tools could do to help, it is very important, but I don't think that other than the people like you who are actually working in this area, I don't really hear others talking about it that much, other than maybe the internationalization as translations. That's kind of as far as it goes. It's almost surprising.
It is surprising, and I think that there's a lot of stigma associated with disability. I mean, statistically, 1 in 4 people has a disability. Like that's a huge number of people who have a disability, and like we all know, 4 people. So if you think statistically, like the chances that one of our friends or family has a disability is like it's off the charts. Like, but we don't talk about it that way. We don't. And a lot of the disabilities are hidden. So, how many people have dyslexia? Like that is a disability. Like if you have trouble reading, especially in a literacy culture, that's a real big challenge. We can't necessarily go off and identify somebody who has a disability or doesn't have a disability, but we think we can because this is. We think we can tell those people who are blind because they have a cane or they have a wheelchair. Like there's these sort of simplified versions that people come to, and it's like no, like not even everyone who is legally blind has a cane. You can be legally blind and be functioning as a like I was in a conference in Kobe, Japan, as it turns out. And talking with this great guy, another Canadian, about things, and he has 10% of his vision. That's all he has left is 10% of his vision, but he has enough vision and enough awareness that I wouldn't have known that in most instances. Like there's a couple places where I was like, oh, I could. He can't see what was, some of the food that was available. He couldn't. The buffet wasn't very useful if he was picky about what he wanted to eat. But other than that, like he looked like I wouldn't have known. And it's a. I think that there's a lot of people like that where we make assumptions about people's ability that are just incorrect, and we don't necessarily have we have a bias to sort of assume that if people are walking around that they don't have a disability, and we have a very narrow definition of what that means.
Yeah, and people usually also try not to advertise their disability because no one really wants their disability to define them and who they are. So nobody's walking around with a bubble above their head that this is the list of disabilities that I have, and how that makes it harder for me to get around, pick the food, or do whatever else they want to do.
There's also a myth around how what it is to be a human, and I think that people want to believe in our society that you can be an atomic, isolated, independent person. That is a virtue for people to be, and I think that's very much also tied to software. Like we have these visions of these leaders of tech communities, and we tend to see them as like, oh yeah, it was Steve Jobs that did X, or here's like we pick these individuals and we give them the credit because we have a hero myth issue that we're dealing with, as opposed to sort of addressing the community that really is responsible for making it happen. Even looking at things like I remember listening to a great speech by Angela Davis, who was talking about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the U.S. Amazing stuff. But the point, as I recall this talk from ages ago, King is a person that was held up as being the leader of the space. But if there hadn't been thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, especially women, who did the housework of the movement, it wouldn't have happened. Like it's, there are people who are elevated into positions of power, but are areas of influence, but it really depends on the community, and we don't tell that story enough. Whether it's in our fiction, like the Harry Potter myths, like so many of our fictional stories come down to a hero, usually a white guy, going off and saving the day, and it's like, well, interesting theory, but like it's kind of boring, and also it's not reality. So why don't we start telling better stories about how change is actually made in the world?
I love that, and I think that really is important to highlight and keep talking about. And I think this is why the people I know in open source who learned about it and then they were just quote unquote hooked, that we can't really leave the community anymore, because it's not about one person. It's the entire community doing something together. And then, yes, of course, people have bad days and sometimes they're angry and frustrated about something, but deep down it's always a marching towards that goal that the community has and not what individuals have. And even when you look at communities like the Linux kernel, it obviously has Linus Torvalds as the benevolent dictator for life, or BDFL for people who like acronyms, but it's not about everyone is working for him. He makes decisions about the kernel that he thinks will serve the kernel the best. And there are obviously other maintainers in the project as well, in the community, so it's not only him who makes decisions. And the Linux kernel would not exist without the community, and everyone, including Linus Torvalds, knows that. And it's a really good example to what you were talking about, because Linux is in space, circulating around the moon right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we speak, and it's because of the community and the speed of innovation that's been happening in the kernel, and the Linux ecosystem overall is also on the community. And you can look at all the companies who are involved, but they are involved in a large community where they all work together so that the kernel itself is solid and it's developed in a high pace.
Yeah, no, there's so much to being able to freely exchange ideas, and to be able to learn about them and share ideas, and to build on each other's successes. Like we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Everything that I know is being because other people helped me along the way, and to acknowledge that and be able to help realize that they're, hopefully I'm providing guidance and direction that's going to help the next generation be able to take what I've done and go much further than I did. But it's thinking about this as a long-term project, and finding ways to support each other, and even to support each other across different projects. Like I'm very familiar with the Drupal world, but I try and help out the Typo 3 people if I can, or the Joomla people. I was just talking to a maintainer of Joomla earlier today, and it's like there's ways that we can help each other, and can learn from each other, and to test stuff out so that we can get a product that is really as good as it can be. And it's so fascinating when you bring bright people together on a common problem, the kinds of solutions you can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, experiences and skills are transferable. So whenever you do something, when you get involved, get in touch with another community, there's always something you can do. I never experienced that I went someplace and there was literally nothing I could have done because I was new. We kind of created this accessibility focus area within Drupal at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I started with one issue, the one I brought to Angie Byron, and then I discovered other issues, and then I discovered other issues. And it became almost addictive because you're able to, I mean, so often in our work, you're able, the changes you're able to make are tied to a particular project. What is the project that a client is paying you to do? And that is, ultimately the client has to say, they're able to set their priorities. Like there's limitations on what you can do when you're working with a client. But when you have the option in the time that you're not doing client work to be able to fix something for good, not just for your client, but for all clients going forward forever. I mean, like it's a huge thing to be able to actually shift the internet. And with the help of hundreds of people, I've been able to play a part in shaping the internet to make one project a little bit more accessible, and to be able to set a model that I'm hoping that others will follow or be able to follow, to be able to have accessibility built into the practices that others are trying to build as well. So trying to share those best practices so that we can learn from each other and be further ahead today than we were yesterday, which is the entire goal of both open source and accessibility, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And so when you started to work on this area, was the community, the Drupal community at large, receptive to what you were starting to do? Like, I understand that you probably, when Angie told you to go report an issue and fix the bug that you found, that was straightforward, but it also grew into sort of an entire focus area for a very good reason. Was the community receptive and supportive as it was starting to form and take shape?
And there definitely was, and I think it is really important for any kind of culture change to be able to have leadership at the top of the organization be able to speak to it. And so because Drupal's founder Dries was supportive of it, because Angie Byron was supportive of it, because Acquia went off and invested in hiring people to look at and to contribute to accessibility issues, because there was buy-in, and because we were able to clearly identify that accessibility issues were not features, they're bugs. If you're blocking a portion of the, like, if you're blocking people from accessing your website, if there's a WCAG success criteria that you're failing, that's a bug. It's not a feature request. And even just setting that goal ahead so that there's a clear project-wide distinction of what is a feature and what is a bug, that did a lot. And that wouldn't have been possible if Drupal core hadn't committed to that. If we hadn't committed to going and having WCAG 2.0 initially is the standard we're trying to develop to. That's making it public, making it something that we're able to stop issues and say, well, we're actually not going to release this until we fix this critical accessibility issue. And again, we haven't fixed all the accessibility issues, but when there's been something that is being deemed as critical, we have put on the brakes and stalled releases of the project because of accessibility issues, and that was certainly the case in Drupal 7 and also in Drupal 8. In Drupal 8 there was in Drupal 7 we worked to go off and make the front end accessible and the back end accessible, so that a blind user would be able to navigate both the front and the back end, and that was really the back end was unusual at that time, because this is over a decade ago, and there weren't that many people thinking about, what do you mean blind people using the admin interface? I don't know any blind users that use it, that do administrative work in with Drupal. It's like, that was basically what people were saying, and people are still saying that. Like, there's still people I know in government who have been recently, that I know have been told, like, we don't have to worry about the accessibility of the back end because our people don't have disabilities. It's like, what? Like, when is this the case? Like, this is ridiculous. In Drupal 8, we tried to take it further, and we tried to go off and implement what is called ATAG, which is the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines. And this includes partly the work that we did in Drupal 7, trying to make sure that the backend is accessible. But the more important part of ATAG is ATAG Part B, which is how do we make sure that the content that is that is created through Drupal is as accessible as possible? How do we make sure that we're supporting authors in creating the most accessible tools out there? Because there's hundreds of thousands of Drupal authors out there who are creating content all of the time, and very, very, very few of them are accessibility experts. And even the accessibility experts, like myself, sometimes we forget to put in alt text because things are busy. So the more we can have the authoring tools help authors create more accessible content, the easier it is. And it's and that philosophy is something that the WC3 has been championing for at least a decade since that was released. But it's hard because people, all of the regulations, all the policies are all geared towards what is the result on the page, not how did you get to the content on the page. Like there's just a real shortcoming in how we understand how content is created on the web.
So part of the challenge is where accessibility meets inclusivity in terms of accepting the fact that just because you don't know anyone in your close circle, for example, who wasn't trying to access the back end as a blind user or administrator, it doesn't mean that they don't exist, and it doesn't mean that a person with that disability, for example, would not want to become an administrator only if they could access the back end with that disability that they have.
Yeah.
So,
and we also just don't know that, like, who are the people who we are depending on now who might lose their vision tomorrow. Just that, like, yeah, like this is a critical person in your organization, and they can see now, but we don't know about what the situation will be tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned a few things that I picked up on, which sound like a mindset shift and a conceptual shift, like what you said about accessibility work. It's not a list of features, it's a list of bugs, which I assume helped making it a priority and being able to market critical, because every feature is critical to the person who's trying to push it through.
Yep.
If you look back your journey in Drupal, do you have like a few milestone kind of examples in the accessibility area, how Drupal evolved up until today? Like what are the things and the moments when you felt that this is moving forward and the community is helping the users who are trying to create and access content on the web, and when you felt that this was a big step forward in that area?
I mean, I think one of the big ones was when accessibility was made one of the core gates for Drupal. So there was a decision, I forget when it was, but Dries and others went off and set up at the time 4 core gates. There's performance, there was usability, there was what's the other one, and accessibility. Like there were a limited number of them, and to have accessibility elevated on the stage of DrupalCon with the Dries note and sort of talk about this, like that was a huge deal, because again, you've got leadership doing this. This is something that's a process and a policy that is going to be managed by the community, and that to have accessibility issues be blockers, just like security issues are blockers. Like that's non-trivial for any community to go off and to say, again, exactly how that's being managed is another issue. But it was a real boost to go off and to have accessibility issues raised that way, and to have the delay of releases of Drupal be delayed, just to have that the releases pushed back months until we had something fixed. And one of the big ones was, for Drupal 8 was inline form errors, the ability to try and create to create form errors that were done in a way that were accessible, so that when you made a mistake in Drupal, you would know what that mistake was, and you could fix it as easily as possible, which is basic usability, but it's something where, like, how do you define it? How do you maintain it? How do you get it so that when you've got something as complicated as the Drupal's admin interface, that you're able to go off and have appropriate and meaningful error messages throughout that very, very complicated interface.
To make sure I understand it correctly, what you said, that accessibility became that sort of release criteria, and it had sort of the quote unquote power, as you mentioned, to stop a release and delay it, because the issues that you were trying to fix or what people developed, they did not meet the accessibility criteria or standards within the community at the time.
It's still the case. It's a matter of the accessibility team standing up and saying, this is a blocker, this needs to be fixed. But it's still the case that we can stop issues from or stop releases from getting out if there are significant accessibility bugs that we need to address beforehand.
They made a lot of improvements in Drupal in the area of accessibility. I assume you also documented all these things and started to create guidelines for people in terms of how to think about accessibility. So if anyone out there is still new, or maybe just got an idea that, oh, maybe accessibility is something that I should think about, whatever the thing that I'm working on for, where would they go find and some guidelines and practices that the Drupal community already worked out and figured out and put together?
So the best starting point is going to any page on Drupal.org and going down to the footer, where you'll find that there's an accessibility link, as there should be in any project. And that accessibility link goes to a page that has links to our handbook. It has links to the accessibility style guide. It has links to how to go off and submit an issue and what the issues are, and some modules that may help you go off and enhance your Drupal site. It's really the hub of where people should go. But I've also not limited the work I've done on documentation just to Drupal. I've also tried to, and also just to be clear, I'm not really a documentation person. Words are something that I struggle to go off and to write down, and to, like, documentation does not come naturally. And when I find AI documentation, is like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier to have, like, comprehensive documentation written by an AI than it is for me to try and even begin to craft, like, some general ideas. Like, I'm not good at writing documentation, and really value those people who are. But in the meantime, there's AI, which is so much better than what I can do. But I'm involved also with the World Wide Web Consortium, as I said, and the one of the interesting pieces is looking at the accessible roles and responsibilities mapping project, which is trying to go off and say, let's take all of these WCAG success criteria and how do we split these up to find out, or to assess, to evaluate, like, who's responsible for what. These are the standards that the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, implements around web standards, and those web standards are used for mobile sites. They're the most the most commonly used standard for evaluating digital accessibility, even though they're not necessarily they're not written for things like computer software or native mobile applications, but this is this is the standard for the web. So if you can take these WCAG issues and break them down into the individual roles and responsibilities that digital teams have, then you can say, as a front-end engineer, you don't have to learn all of it. Like, you don't need to know color contrast, but you do need to know these issues. Like, if there's areas if there's problems with area, if there's problems with form construction, if there's problems with, like, that's on you. That's your definition of quality is going to come from knowing these issues. And same with the visual designers. Like, a visual designer needs to know color contrast. And if you don't know how color contrast works, and you don't know how to manage the focus styles and how to make sure that you, if you don't know those basic things, then no, you're not doing your job. You have to go back and learn more in order to provide a quality quality service as a visual designer in 2026. And that doesn't mean going back to school. Like, there's so many free resources on accessibility. There's webinars, there's blogs, there's courses you can take. Like, there's so many easy ways and free ways to learn how to do this. There may not be time, like, everyone's busy, but if you don't know, you can ask to learn. You should take time to go off and say, I need to brush up on how I can implement WCAG 2.2.2, because I don't know what the new implications are for me as a UX person, and I understand that there's some elements that are part of that I need to manage, but I need help to understand this, to keep up with the standards, so that I can do a good job. So I've been working with people who are trying to document that and make that easier for people to understand, so that you're not just sort of saying, just memorize this boring, memorize all of WCAG and then let's get to work, because there's a lot of it that just is not relevant to you on a regular basis, and if it's not related to what you're trying to do for your job, then and if you don't have a process to sort of manage groups of teams that have where there's mutual, where different roles have a responsibility for implementing the success criteria, you're going to get lost. It has to be something that's real and tangible that you're practicing on a regular basis as part of your job, if it's going to be something that is maintained properly over time.
Before we depart, Mike, can you please tell us something about yourself that has nothing to do with web development, standards, accessibility and sustainability work, something of a hobby or a fun fact that you don't mind sharing?
Okay, here's a fun one. So my wife and I own or co-own a little bit of property on a lake that has a yurt. So when we go to this little yurt that's in a isolated part of rural Ontario and hang out and watch the sunset, and it's an amazing space to go off and be able to spend time, and we're surrounded by lovely people in the community that we know there, and it's but that ability to go off and to have a yurt as a there aren't that many yurting people out there, but I'm a fan as a yurt owner. I'm a fan, and that's something that most people don't know about me.
Wow, I think you're the only person I know who owns a yurt. That is so cool. Do you even have electricity or anything there, or
There's no electricity. There's a solar panel, and there's what else? We have some internet or some cell access, but essentially it's we drive in and we walk into the yurt and then bring our stuff along with us and set it up and stay for the weekend and then come back, and it's quite nice.
So that is kind of a place, an opportunity for you to also disconnect from the world, because when it comes to some cell access, that's usually not fast internet to stare Netflix at on.
No, it's maybe I can get email, maybe I can browse the web, but it's a maybe. So yeah.
And with that, that's all, folks. That was our episode for today. What did resonate with you the most? What new ideas, strategy, or useful tips did you hear today? Or you have a comment or follow-up question to ask? Comment on the episode below, or start a conversation on your favorite social media platform. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so others can discover it too. And stay tuned, because the next episode is just around the corner.